Sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything. For 16-year-old Dexter Washington, that moment came on a quiet Thursday night when Michael Jordan walked into Peterson's Footwear just before closing time. The choice seemed simple. Help the NBA's rising star find the right shoes for tomorrow's game, or keep his job that helped put food on his family's table. What Dex didn't know was that this wasn't just about shoes. It was about a promise made years ago, a father's legacy, and a test that would reveal how sometimes the biggest moments in life come disguised as mistakes. This is the story of how a young man lost his dream job and found his true calling, all because he chose kindness over comfort, character over convenience, and didn't realize he was being watched by people who had been waiting 5 years to see what he would do when everything was on the line. The smell of fresh leather and rubber filled the air as Dexter Dex Washington carefully arranged the newest shipment of basketball shoes on the display shelf. His dark fingers traced the smooth surface of each box, making sure they lined up perfectly. At 16, this part-time job at Peterson's Footwear was more than just a way to earn money. It was his window into the world of basketball. "Hey, Dex, could you help me find these in a size 12? A regular customer held up a pair of Nike Air Force Ones, the white leather gleaming under the store's fluorescent lights. "Sure thing, Mr. Thompson." Dex's face broke into a wide smile. He knew every shoe in the store like they were old friends. "I think we just got those in yesterday. Give me 1 minute." As he headed to the stockroom, Dex caught his reflection in one of the store's many mirrors. His mother always said he was growing too fast for his clothes, and the slightly short sleeves of his blue store uniform proved her right. But Dex didn't mind. Each inch he gained brought him closer to his dream of dunking on a regulation hoop. The stockroom was Dex's favorite place in the store. Rows of shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with shoes of every size and style imaginable. He knew exactly where to find what Mr. Thompson needed, but he took an extra moment to breathe in the familiar scent of cardboard and fresh shoes. This room reminded him of his father. 5 years had passed since the accident, but Dex could still hear his dad's voice. "Son, there's nothing more important than helping others, even if it costs you something." Those words echoed in his mind every time he helped a customer find the perfect pair of shoes. Back on the sales floor, Dex knelt to help Mr. Thompson try on the shoes. "How do they feel, sir?" "Perfect, as always." Mr. Thompson stood and took a few steps. "You know, Dex, you're the only person who gets it right the first time. Most folks don't understand that I need a little extra width." Dex beamed with pride. "It's my job to pay attention to details like that." The bell above the store's door chimed, and Dex looked up to see his mother, Marlene, walking in. She wore her nurse's scrubs, her hair tied back neatly despite the long shift she'd just finished at the hospital. "Just checking in on my favorite shoe expert," she said, giving Dex a tired smile. "Don't forget, we need to go grocery shopping after your shift." Dex nodded, quickly calculating the money he'd saved from his last paycheck. "I got paid yesterday, Mama. I can help with the groceries this time." His mother's eyes softened, but she shook her head. "You save your money for college, baby. I've got the groceries covered." But Dex knew better. He'd seen the pile of bills on their kitchen table that morning. Each envelope marked "Final Notice" in angry red letters. Ever since Dad died, money had been tight, and his mother worked double shifts just to keep their small apartment. "At least, let me chip in for the basics," he insisted quietly, not wanting other customers to overhear. Dad would have wanted me to help. The mention of his father made his mother's smile fade slightly. "Your father would have wanted you to focus on your studies and basketball. Speaking of which, did you finish your homework?" "Yes, ma'am." did it during my lunch break. Dex had learned to manage his time carefully between school, work, and practice. His grades weren't perfect, but they were good enough to keep him on the basketball team, and that's what mattered most. As his mother left, Mr. Peterson, the store owner, emerged from his office. His round glasses sat low on his nose as he surveyed the sales floor. "Washington, those new Jordan displays need to be up before closing. Nike's sending a representative tomorrow." "Yes, sir. I'll start on them right away." Dex hurried to the window displays, his heart racing at the mention of Jordan. Michael Jordan was more than just a rookie sensation. He was everything Dex dreamed of becoming. The afternoon passed quickly as Dex arranged the displays. He positioned each shoe carefully, making sure the light hit them just right. These weren't just sneakers. They were works of art, each one telling a story of possibility and potential. Near closing time, the store was almost empty. Dex swept the floors while humming his favorite tune, thinking about the upcoming basketball game. His team was playing their biggest rivals on Friday, and Coach had promised him more playing time if he kept his grades up. The sound of the door chime interrupted his thoughts. Dex looked up, ready to tell the customer they were about to close, but the words died in his throat. Standing in the doorway, slightly out of breath and looking worried, was Michael Jordan himself. The famous rookie was taller in person than Dex had imagined, and he wore a simple tracksuit that did nothing to hide his athletic build. Their eyes met across the store, and Dex felt his heart stop. "I know you're about to close," Jordan said, his voice carrying across the empty store. "But I really need some help. Got a game tomorrow, and there's something wrong with my shoes." Mr. Peterson emerged from his office, keys jingling in his hand. "Sorry, sir, but we're closing in 5 minutes. You'll have to come back tomorrow." Dex looked at the clock, 8:55 p.m. His shift was technically over, and his mother was waiting with their grocery list. But there was Michael Jordan, asking for help, and his father's words echoed in his mind. Nothing more important than helping others. The next few seconds would change everything, but Dex didn't know that yet. All he knew was that someone needed his help, and he had a choice to make. "I can stay, Mr. Peterson," Dex said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I'll help Mr. Jordan find what he needs." Mr. Peterson's face darkened, and Dex knew he was breaking store policy. But as he watched Jordan's worried expression turn to relief, he knew he was making the right choice, even if it cost him something. Little did Dex know that choice would cost him everything and give him everything in return. But that part of the story was yet to come. "I said we're closing," Mr. Peterson repeated, his voice sharp enough to cut through the excitement buzzing in Dex's chest. "Washington, get your things and head home." Michael Jordan took a step forward, his presence filling the small store. "Please, I've got a game tomorrow night against the Celtics. Something's wrong with my game shoes, and I heard this was the best shoe store in Charlotte." Dex's hands tightened around the broom handle. He could see the genuine concern in Jordan's eyes, the look of an athlete who needed help. It was the same look Dex got before big games when his shoes didn't feel quite right. "Sir," Dex spoke up, his voice stronger than he felt. "It won't take long. I know every shoe in this store, and I can help Mr. Jordan find exactly what he needs." "Mr." Peterson's face turned red. "Washington, this is the 3rd time this month you've tried to stay past closing. Rules are rules." "I understand, but—" Dex started. "No buts." Mr. Peterson cut him off. "Either clock out now, or don't bother coming back tomorrow." The store fell silent. Even the usual hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade away as Dex faced the biggest decision of his young life. His mother's face flashed in his mind, Her tired eyes, the stack of bills, the groceries they still needed to buy. This job wasn't just about spending money, it was about survival. But then he remembered his father's words again, clearer than ever. "Son, doing the right thing isn't always doing the easy thing." Dex placed the broom against the wall and turned to Jordan. "What seems to be the problem?" "With your shoes, Mr. Jordan?" "Washington!" Mr. Peterson bellowed. "The arch support feels off," Jordan explained, ignoring the manager's outburst. "Been having some pain in my left foot during practice. Need something with better support for tomorrow's game." Dex nodded, already running through the inventory in his mind. "I think I know exactly what you need. Give me 2 minutes." He hurried to the stockroom, his heart pounding against his ribs. Through the door, he could hear Mr. Peterson and Jordan talking in heated voices. Dex tried to block it out as he searched the shelves, looking for the perfect solution. When he emerged, he carried 3 boxes. "These are our best options for arch support. The first one has a special insert that's it." Mr. Peterson slammed his hand on the counter. "You're fired, Washington. Pack up your things and get out." Jordan stepped between them. "Now hold on a minute. This kid is just trying to help me. I'm the one who came in late." "This isn't about you, Mr. Jordan. This is about following store policy." Mr. Peterson's voice trembled with anger. "Washington has been pushing boundaries since he started here." Dex set the boxes down carefully. "You're right, sir. I have been pushing boundaries. Whenever a customer needed help, whenever someone was struggling to find the right fit, whenever there was a chance to make someone's day better." His voice cracked slightly, but he kept going. "My dad taught me that helping others matters more than rules sometimes." "Your dad?" Mr. Peterson's face changed for a split second, something flickering behind his eyes that Dex couldn't quite read. But then the anger returned. "Your dad isn't here, and this is my store. Now get out." Jordan opened one of the boxes Dex had brought out. "These are perfect," he said, examining the shoes. "Exactly what I was looking for. Kid knows his stuff." "Please, Mr. Peterson," Dex tried one last time. "I need this job. My mom. Out." The word echoed through the empty store. With shaking hands, Dex untied his blue store apron. He folded it carefully, the way his mother had taught him to fold his clothes, and placed it on the counter. 3 years of working after school, of memorizing inventory, of helping customers find their perfect fit, all ended in a single moment. "I'm sorry, kid," Jordan said softly. "This isn't right. Let me talk to him." But Dex shook his head. "It's okay, Mr. Jordan. I made my choice." He managed a small smile. "Good luck in your game tomorrow. Those shoes should help with the arch support." As Dex walked to the back room to get his backpack, he heard Jordan arguing with Mr. Peterson. Words like "best employee" and "doing the right thing" drifted through the store, but Dex knew it wouldn't make a difference. He'd seen that look in Mr. Peterson's eyes before. There was no changing his mind. Outside, the Charlotte night air felt heavy with humidity. Dex stood on the sidewalk, watching through the store window as Jordan continued to argue with Mr. Peterson. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his mom asking where he was. How could he tell her? How could he explain that he'd thrown away their financial lifeline because of a choice? She would understand. She always did. But understanding wouldn't pay the bills. As he turned to leave, the store door chimed one last time. Jordan stepped out, holding a shoebox. "Hey, kid," he called out. "Wait up." Dex stopped, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. "I bought the shoes you recommended," Jordan said, his voice serious. "And I want you to know something. What you did in There, that's real character. That's what matters in life. "Thank you, sir," Dex managed to say. "I'm going to make some calls," Jordan continued. "This isn't over." But Dex knew it was. He watched as Jordan got into a sleek black car and drove away, the box of shoes sitting in the passenger seat. Then he looked back at Peterson's footwear one last time, at the window displays he'd arranged so carefully just hours ago. His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't his mother. The number was from Chicago. Little did Dex know, losing this job would lead him to discover a truth about his father that would change everything. But for now, all he could do was stare at the unknown number lighting up his phone screen, wondering if he should answer. Dex's thumb hovered over the green answer button, but the phone stopped ringing before he could decide. The screen showed one missed call from 312 555 G1223, Chicago. He'd memorized the area code back when the Bulls drafted Jordan. "Baby, where are you?" His mother's worried voice cut through the night air. She stood at the corner of the street, still in her nurse's scrubs, concern etched across her face. "I've been waiting at the grocery store for 30 minutes. The weight of what had just happened crashed down on Dex's shoulders. His throat felt tight as he walked toward her, each step heavier than the last. How could he tell her that he'd just lost their second income? That he'd chosen to help Michael Jordan instead of following the rules? "Mama, His voice cracked. Under the yellow streetlight, he could see the dark circles under her eyes from working double shifts. Something happened at work. She must have read it on his face because she reached out and grabbed his hands. Her palms were warm and rough from years of hospital work. "Tell me everything, baby." So he did. Right there on the street corner, with cars passing by and crickets chirping in the background, Dex told her about Jordan coming in late, about Mr. Peterson's ultimatum, about his choice to help anyway. His mother listened silently, her grip on his hands tightening with each word. "And then my phone rang just now," he finished. "A number from Chicago. But I missed it." His mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled him into a hug, right there on the street. "Your father would be so proud of you," she whispered. The mention of his father brought back a flood of memories. Dex was 11 when it happened, just old enough to understand what death meant, but too young to understand why. His father had been driving home from a basketball game, not playing, but watching. He always watched games, took notes, made phone calls afterward. Dex never knew exactly what his father did for work. He just knew it had something to do with basketball. The night his father died, he'd made Dex promise something. Always help others, son. Even when it's hard, even when it costs you something. Promise me. Dex had promised, not knowing how much that promise would cost him 5 years later. His phone buzzed again, another call from Chicago. This time, it went straight to voicemail. "We should get home," his mother said softly. "The groceries can wait until tomorrow." They walked home in silence, but Dex could feel his mother's mind working. She had that look she got when she was trying to solve a problem. The same look she had when the bills piled up, or when the car broke down. Their apartment was small but clean, with basketball posters covering most of Dex's bedroom walls. As they walked in, the answering machine was blinking. 3 new messages. His mother pressed play. "This message is for Dexter Washington," a deep voice said. "My name is Marcus Thompson from the Chicago Bulls organization. Please call me back at your earliest convenience regarding an urgent matter." Beep. "Dex, this is Michael Jordan. I spoke with some people about what happened tonight. Call this number when you can." Beep. "Mr. Washington, This is Linda from Channel 9 News. We'd like to speak with you about an incident that occurred at Peterson's Footwear this evening. Dex and his mother stared at the answering machine. How had the news already heard about what happened? "Mama, what's going on?" Dex asked, his voice small. She shook her head slowly. "I don't know, baby. But something tells me your father's hand is in this, somehow." "What do you mean?" His mother sat down at their small kitchen table, her fingers tracing the worn wood. "Your father, he had connections to the Bulls organization. He never told me exactly what he did for them, but sometimes he'd get calls late at night, just like this." Dex's phone buzzed again. Another Chicago number, but different from the first one. "Should I answer it?" he asked. His mother nodded. "Put it on speaker." With trembling fingers, Dex pressed the green button. "Hello? Is this Dexter Washington?" The voice was formal, but kind. "Yes, sir. Son, my name is Marcus Thompson. I'm calling because we need to discuss something important. Something about your father." Dex's eyes met his mother's across the table. She had gone very still. "What about my father?" Dex asked. "Before he passed, James Washington left something in our care. Something for you. But it came with conditions." There was a pause. "What happened tonight at the shoe store?" "That was part of those conditions." The room seemed to spin. "His father? Conditions? The shoe store?" "I don't understand," Dex said. "You will," Marcus replied. "Check your mail tomorrow. There's a certified letter coming from Chicago. Everything will make sense once you read it." The call ended, leaving Dex and his mother in stunned silence. Outside, a car drove by, its headlights sweeping across their living room walls. The basketball posters cast strange shadows, and for a moment, Dex thought he saw his father's silhouette among them. His phone buzzed one more time. This time, it was a text message from an unknown number. "Your father always said character reveals itself in moments of choice. You revealed yours tonight. Tomorrow, you'll learn why that matters." MJ Dex stared at the message until the screen went dark. All these years, he thought he'd known everything about his father. But now, sitting in their small apartment with mysterious calls from Chicago lighting up his phone, he realized he might not have known his father at all. The certified letter waiting in tomorrow's mail would change everything. His past, his present, and his future. But for now, all he could do was wait and wonder what other secrets his father had left behind. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Dex lay in bed, staring at his Michael Jordan poster in the darkness, his mind racing with questions. Every car that passed made his heart jump, thinking it might be the mail truck, even though he knew mail wouldn't come until afternoon. His phone had stopped ringing, but the text messages kept coming. Local news reporters, radio stations, and even a few college basketball coaches had somehow gotten his number. Each message preview lit up his room like a tiny firefly, but Dex left them all unanswered. Morning came too slowly and too quickly at the same time. When Dex walked into the kitchen, his mother was already there, still in her robe, watching The Who. "Local news! Baby, come look at this," she said, turning up the volume. On screen, a reporter stood outside Peterson's Footwear. The caption read, "Local teen fired for helping NBA star." Last night, 16-year-old Dexter Washington was fired from Peterson's Footwear after staying late to help Chicago Bulls rookie sensation Michael Jordan, the reporter said. Sources say Jordan needed emergency assistance with his game shoes, and Washington chose to help despite his manager's threats to terminate his employment. The scene cut to Michael Jordan himself, standing outside the Chicago stadium. Dex's jaw dropped. Jordan was wearing the shoes he had recommended. That kid showed real character, Jordan was saying. He knew he'd lose his job, but he helped anyway. That's the kind of integrity we need more of in this world. Dex's mother muted the TV. Your father used to say the same thing about integrity. Before Dex could respond, someone knocked on their apartment door. His mother opened it to find Mrs. Jenkins from next door, holding a newspaper. You're on the front page, Dex, she exclaimed, spreading the Charlotte Observer on their kitchen table. Vice. Headline read, Local hero loses job, gains respect. Below it was a photo of Peterson's footwear and a smaller picture of Dex from last year's basketball team photo. The whole building's talking about it, Mrs. Jenkins continued. My Herald says Mr. Peterson should be ashamed of himself. More neighbors started showing up, each bringing something different. News clippings, breakfast casseroles, and stories about times Dex had helped them find the perfect shoes. Mr. Rodriguez from apartment 3B brought his whole family. Remember, when you stayed late to help my daughter find dance shoes, he said, you're a good kid, Dex. Someone's going to see that. By noon, their small apartment was full of people from the neighborhood. Someone had brought a TV from the community room, and they were all watching the story spread across different news channels. Then Coach Marcus arrived. He was still in his gym clothes, like he'd come straight from morning practice. Dex, he called, over the crowd. Got a minute? They stepped into the hallway, away from the noise. Coach Marcus had been more than just a basketball coach to Dex since his father died. He'd been a mentor, someone who pushed him to be better on and off the court. I just got off the phone with some people you might want to talk to, Coach said, his voice low. The Bulls organization has been calling around, asking about you. Not just about last night, but about everything. Your grades, your character, your basketball skills. Dex's heart skipped. Why? That's not my story to tell. Coach handed him a business card. But I think you should come help me at the community center while you figure things out. It's not much money, but it's something. Before Dex could answer, his mother called from inside the apartment. Dex, the mail truck's here. The whole crowd seemed to hold their breath as Dex ran down 3 flights of stairs to the mailbox. His hands shook as he turned the key. Inside was a single envelope, thick, cream-colored, with a Chicago Bulls logo in the corner. The certified mail sticker gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Back in the apartment, everyone watched as Dex carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, along with several photographs he'd never seen before. The first photo made his heart stop. It showed his father, younger and smiling, standing between 2 men in Bulls uniforms. They were in what looked like an office, signing papers. That's Jerry Krause, someone in the crowd whispered, the Bulls' general manager. The second photo was of his father sitting at a basketball game, writing in a small notebook. The date stamp showed it was taken just 2 days before his death. The letter was typed on official Bulls letterhead, but there was a handwritten note paper-clipped to the front. Your father's last scouting report was about you. JK's scouting report? Dex looked at his mother, who had tears in her eyes. I never knew exactly what he did, she said softly. He'd go to games, take notes, make calls. He said he was working for the future of basketball. Dex's hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. The words swam before his eyes. Dear Mr. Washington, your father, James Washington, was more than just a scout for the Chicago Bulls organization. He was a finder of character, of potential, of that special something that makes a player great, beyond their skills. Before his passing, he left specific instructions about you. Last night's events at Peterson's Footwear were no accident. Your father believed that true character reveals itself in moments of choice, when doing the right thing costs something. He arranged this test before his death, trusting that when the moment came, you would make the choice he knew you would make. There is more to this story, much more, but it can only be told in person. We have arranged for 2 plane tickets to Chicago for you and your mother, departing tomorrow morning. All expenses will be covered. Your father left something in our care 5 years ago. Tomorrow, you'll understand why last night had to happen exactly the way it did. Sincerely, Jerry Krause, General Manager, Chicago Bulls. The room had gone completely silent. Dex read the letter 3 times, trying to make sense of it all. His father had been a scout for the Bulls? He had arranged last night's test? But how? Why? His phone buzzed one final time. Another text from the unknown number. Your father once told me, "Character is the only thing worth scouting. See you in Chicago, kid. MJ." As the sun set over Charlotte, casting long shadows through their apartment windows, Dex realized that losing his job at Peterson's Footwear wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning. Tomorrow, he would board a plane to Chicago and finally learn the truth about his father's legacy. But even as questions swirled in his mind, one thing was becoming clear. Sometimes the biggest moments in life look like mistakes until you understand the whole story. The morning sun hadn't even risen when Dex and his mother stepped out of their apartment building. Their neighbors had insisted on driving them to the airport, forming a small convoy of 3 cars packed with well-wishers. "Got everything?" his mother asked, checking their hastily packed bags one more time. She'd called the hospital late last night to arrange emergency time off, something she'd never done before. Dex patted his backpack where he kept the letter and photos. He hadn't let them out of his sight since yesterday. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Jenkins handed them each a paper bag. "Breakfast sandwiches," she said with a warm smile. "Can't fly on an empty stomach." The drive to Charlotte Douglas International Airport felt surreal. Dex watched the city wake up through the car window, streetlights giving way to dawn. Everything looked different somehow, like the whole world had shifted slightly since that moment Michael Jordan walked into the shoe store. At the airport, they found a Bulls representative waiting for them at check-in, holding a sign with their names. She was tall and professional-looking, wearing a Bulls lanyard around her neck. "Good morning, Mr. Washington, Mrs. Washington," she said warmly. "I'm Sarah Chen from the Bulls front office. We've arranged everything for your flight." Their neighbors hugged them goodbye, making Dex promise to call as soon as they landed. As they walked through security, Dex noticed his mother's hands were shaking. "Mama?" he asked softly. "You okay?" She nodded, but her eyes were distant. "Just thinking about your father. All those trips he took, all those late-night phone calls. I never knew he was working for the Bulls." "Why didn't he tell us?" "Your father." She paused, finding the words. He believed some things had to be earned, not given. Maybe this was one of them. They found their gate easily. Sarah had arranged first-class tickets, something neither of them had ever experienced. As they settled into the waiting area, Dex's phone buzzed with a text from Coach Marcus. "Whatever happens in Chicago, remember who you are. Your father's legacy isn't just about basketball." Before Dex could respond, the gate agent called for first-class boarding. As they walked down the jet bridge, his mother squeezed his hand. "I'm scared, baby," she whispered. "Me too, Mama." The plane was bigger than Dex had imagined, with seats that could almost lay flat. A flight attendant brought them orange juice in real glasses before takeoff, treating them like they belonged there. As the plane taxied to the runway, Dex pulled out the photos again. He studied his father's face in that office scene. the way he stood so confidently between the Bulls executives. There was something in his expression, a quiet pride that Dex had never understood until now. The plane lifted off, leaving Charlotte behind. Below them, Peterson's footwear became smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. Somewhere down there, Mr. Peterson was probably opening the store, arranging shoes that Dex would never help sell. "Look at this," his mother said suddenly, pointing to something in the airline magazine. It was an advertisement for the Chicago Bulls, featuring Michael Jordan. The tagline read, "Character makes champions." "That was your father's phrase," she said softly. "He used to say it all the time." The flight seemed both endless and too short. Dex tried to sleep but couldn't, his mind racing with questions. What had his father left for him? Why did it require a test at the shoe store? And how had they arranged for Michael Jordan to be there at exactly the right moment? When they landed at O'Hare International Airport, another Bulls representative was waiting for them. This time a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. "Marcus Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "We spoke on the phone." Dex shook his hand, remembering the voice from that first call. "Sir, can you tell us what's going on?" Marcus smiled, but shook his head. "Not here. There's someone waiting to explain everything." A sleek black car with Bulls logos on the doors waited outside. As they drove through Chicago, Dex pressed his face against the window, taking in the massive buildings and busy streets. They passed the iconic Chicago Stadium, its red brick exterior standing proud against the morning sky. But they didn't stop there. Instead, the car turned down a quieter street, pulling up to a small, elegant restaurant that looked closed for the day. "This was your father's favorite place," Marcus explained as he led them inside. "He said the real work of basketball happened over breakfast, not in boardrooms." The restaurant was empty except for one table in the corner. As they got closer, Dex's heart nearly stopped. Jerry Krause, the Bulls' general manager, stood up to greet them. Behind him sat Michael Jordan himself, dressed casually in jeans and a Bulls sweatshirt. But it was the third person at the table. That made Dex's mother gasp. A man in his 60s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, rose slowly from his chair. He had a familiar smile, one that Dex had seen in his father's photos. "Hello, Dexter," the man said warmly. "I'm Phil Knight, founder of Nike. Your father was one of my closest friends, and we've been waiting 5 years to have this conversation." Dex felt the world tilt slightly. Nike's founder? His father's friend? "Please, sit down," Phil gestured to the empty chairs. "It's time you learned what your father was really building all those years, and why that moment in the shoe store was more important than you could have imagined." As Dex and his mother sat down, he noticed a familiar shoebox on the table, the same model he'd helped Jordan pick out 2 nights ago. But there was something else next to it. A worn leather notebook with his father's initials embossed on the cover. Whatever was in that notebook was about to change everything. But first, they had to hear the story that began long before Dex was born. A story about shoes, scouts, and the true meaning of his father's favorite phrase. "Character makes champions." Phil Knight's fingers traced the worn edges of the leather notebook. "Your father," he began, "wasn't just looking for basketball talent. He was searching for something far more rare." The restaurant was silent, except for the gentle clink of coffee, cups being filled. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the white tablecloth. James Washington could spot character from a mile away, Jerry Krause added, leaning forward. "He's the one who first noticed Michael here, but not for the reasons you might think." Jordan nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Your father watched me play in high school. But it wasn't my scoring that caught his eye. It was what you did after the games, Phil continued. James wrote about it right here. He opened the notebook to a dog-eared page and began to read. Jordan stays late after every game. He thanks the janitors, helps stack chairs. Character. Isn't what you do when everyone's watching, it's what you do when no one is. Dex's mother wiped tears from her eyes. That sounds just like him. James believed that great athletes weren't born in gyms, Phil went on. They were born in moments of choice. So he created a scouting system unlike anything in basketball, one that looked beyond statistics and highlight reels. Jerry Krause pulled out a folder filled with papers. Your father developed what we now call the Washington Protocol. Every player we scout goes through it, though they never know they're being tested. Like the shoe store, Dex said quietly, understanding beginning to dawn. Exactly. Jordan leaned back in his chair. That night wasn't an accident. We recreated one of your father's favorite tests, the closing time challenge. He believed that how someone treats others when they're tired, frustrated, or under pressure reveals their true character. Marcus Thompson, who had been standing quietly by the door, joined them at the table. James used to say that anyone can be kind when it's easy. The real test is being kind when it costs you something. Phil Knight opened the notebook to another page. The last entry your father ever wrote was about you, Dexter. The night before he died, he watched you at the community center. Dex remembered that day. He'd stayed late to help Coach Marcus clean up after practice. It had been raining, and the floor needed extra mopping. He wrote, "Watched my son today. He doesn't know I'm here. Spent an hour helping the janitor mop floors after practice. Didn't complain once. Didn't ask for recognition. Just saw what needed to be done and did it. He's ready." Phil's voice cracked slightly as he read the words. "Ready for what?" Dex's mother asked. Jerry Krause smiled. James set up a trust before he died. But he was very specific about the conditions. The recipient had to pass the character test without knowing they were being tested. Had to show the same values James believed in: kindness, integrity, and service to others. The shoe store incident wasn't just about helping me, Jordan added. It was about choosing to do the right thing even when it hurt. Just like your father would have done. Phil Knight stood up and walked to a side door. There's something else we need to show you. James left one more surprise. They followed Phil through the door and down a hallway lined with basketball photographs. Dex recognized some of the players, NBA legends whose stories he'd grown up reading about. At the end of the hall was another door. Phil turned to face them before opening it. James Washington changed basketball in ways most people will never know. He believed that building character was just as important as building skills. That's why he worked with both the Bulls and Nike. He wanted to create a program that would identify and support young people who showed real character. He opened the door to reveal a large conference room. The walls were covered with more photos, but these were different. They showed young people helping others, working hard, making choices that cost them something. "Welcome," Phil said, "to the Washington Character Development Program. Your father's real legacy." On the conference table sat a stack of folders. Each one had a name on it. Young people from around the country who had been secretly observed, tested, and identified as having exceptional character. The trust your father set up, Jerry Krause explained, isn't just money. It's a mission. He wanted to create a network of young people who would change basketball and the world through character and kindness. Jordan picked up one of the folders. Each person in these files has a story like yours, Dex. They made choices that cost them something, but showed who they really were. And now, Phil said. "You have a choice to make." He handed Dex another folder, this one with his own name on it. Inside was everything: reports from the shoe store incident, observations from Coach Marcus over the years, even notes from his teachers about times he'd helped others without being asked. "Your father left you two things," Marcus explained. "First, a full scholarship to any college you choose. Second, a position as the youngest member of the Washington Character Development Program's leadership team. But," Jerry Krause added, "you have to choose to accept it. Just like every other choice your father believed in, this one has to come from your heart." Dex looked at his mother, who was crying openly now. Then he looked at the photos on the wall, all those young people who, like him, had been noticed for their character rather than their accomplishments. "There's one more thing," Jordan said, reaching for that familiar shoebox on the table. "The shoes you helped me pick out? They're going to be part of a new line. We want to call them Washington Ones, shoes that represent character and kindness." Dex's hands shook as he opened the box. Inside were the shoes he'd recommended, but with a small difference. On the heel, in subtle gold lettering, were the words, "Character makes champions." The morning sun had fully risen now, flooding the conference room with light. As Dex stood there, holding the shoes, and surrounded by his father's legacy, he realized that losing his job at Peterson's Footwear hadn't been the end of his story. It had been the beginning of something much bigger. But there was still one more secret to reveal, one that would explain why Mr. Peterson had reacted so strongly to the mention of Dex's father that night at the store. And that truth would tie everything together in a way no one could have predicted. Just as Phil Knight was about to speak again, the conference room door opened. A familiar figure stepped inside, and Dex felt his heart stop. Mr. Peterson stood there, looking smaller somehow without his usual store manager's confidence. His round glasses were slightly fogged from the Chicago morning, and he held a worn leather notebook identical to the one on the table. "I believe," Mr. Peterson said softly, "it's time I returned this." Dex's mother gasped. "Thomas Peterson? After all these years?" Mr. Peterson nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "Hello, Marlene. It's been a long time." Phil Knight pulled out a chair. "Sit down, Tom. Dex needs to hear this part of the story." As Mr. Peterson sat, he placed his notebook next to the other one on the table. Side by side, they looked like mirrors of each other, both bearing the same initials. "J.W., your father, Mr." Peterson began, his voice trembling, "wasn't just my best friend. He was my scouting partner." The room fell silent. Dex looked between his mother and Mr. Peterson, trying to understand. "Before you were born," Mr. Peterson continued, "your father and I traveled together, scouting players for the Bulls. We developed the character test system together. But more than that, we had a dream of changing basketball forever." Jerry Krause nodded. "They were the best scouting team we ever had. They could spot real character better than anyone." "The shoe store," Mr. Peterson said, opening his notebook, "was our favorite test location. We'd set up situations, a customer coming in late, someone needing special help, a difficult choice between rules and kindness. We believed that how someone handled these moments revealed their true character." Dex's mind raced back to that night, seeing it all differently now. "You knew. You knew Jordan was coming." Mr. Peterson nodded. "I've been working with the program all along, helping to identify young people with exceptional character. But testing you, that was the hardest thing I've ever done." "But why?" Dex asked. "Why push me away? Why make it hurt so much?" "Because," Jordan cut in, "that was part of your father's plan. He believed the truest test of character isn't just doing the right thing. It's doing the right thing even when it breaks your heart. Mr. Peterson wiped his eyes. The night your father died, we had just finished writing the final version of the Washington Protocol. He made me promise something. He opened his notebook and read, "Watch over my son, Tom, but don't make it easy for him. Character grows strongest through challenges." "So, all those times you were hard on me at the store," Dex began. "I was following your father's instructions, pushing you, testing you, watching you grow into the young man he knew you could be." Mr. Peterson's voice cracked. "And every time you chose kindness over convenience, service over self-interest, I wrote it down in this notebook, just like your father would have done." Phil Knight stood up and walked to a cabinet in the corner. "There's something else you need to see, Dex." He pulled out a framed photograph and handed it to him. The photo showed 3 young men, barely older than Dex, standing in front of a small shoe store. With a shock, he recognized his father and Mr. Peterson. But it was the store's name that made his heart skip. Peterson and Washington's Footwear. "Your father and I started as shoe salesmen," Mr. Peterson explained. "We believed you could tell everything about a person by how they treated others while trying on shoes. That's how we caught the Bulls' attention, by sending them detailed character reports about young players who came into our store. When James died," Jerry Krause added, "Tom sold his share of the business and transformed it into a testing ground for the Washington Protocol. Every young person who's worked at Peterson's Footwear has been quietly evaluated for the program." Dex looked at the 2 notebooks on the table. Years of observations, tests, and dreams written down by 2 best friends who believed character mattered more than anything else. "There's one last thing," Mr. Peterson said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out an envelope. "Your father wrote this for you, to be opened only after you pass the final test." With trembling hands, Dex opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in his father's familiar handwriting. "My dear son, if you're reading this, it means you've proven what I always knew. That character isn't inherited, it's earned through choices. The hardest test wasn't at the shoe store. It was watching you grow up without me, hoping you'd learn the lessons I didn't have time to teach you in person. Tom promised to be tough on you, to help you grow strong. The Bulls promised to watch over you, and Nike promised to help me build something that would outlast us all. A program that believes character matters more than statistics. The Washington Character Development Program is now yours to help lead. The young people in those folders need someone to believe in them, to test them, to help them grow, just like Tom did for you. Remember, character makes champions, not because it leads to victory, but because it leads to something far more important. It leads to lives that make a difference. I am so proud of you, son. Love, Dad." Dex looked up at Mr. Peterson through tears. All this time, I was keeping my promise to my best friend." Mr. Peterson smiled sadly. "And now, if you'll have me, I'd like to keep being part of your journey. Not as your boss, but as your father's friend and your mentor in the program." Jordan reached for the shoebox again. "These aren't just shoes, Dex. They're the first product of the Washington Character Development Program. Every pair sold will help fund scholarships for young people who show the same character you did." Dex stood up slowly, looking around the room at these people who had been watching over him all along. Phil Knight, Jerry Krause, Michael Jordan, and Mr. Peterson. His father's legacy wasn't just a program or a pair of shoes. It was a belief that character still matters, that small choices can change lives, and that sometimes the hardest tests lead to the greatest gifts. But as Dex would soon discover, this wasn't the end of his father's story. There was one final surprise waiting, one that would bring everything full circle in the most unexpected way. And there you have it, Friends. A story that reminds us how a single act of kindness can change not just one life, but generations to come. Just like Dex discovered, character really does make champions. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location in the comments below and share a moment when you chose kindness, even though it wasn't easy. Let's create our own Washington Protocol community right here. If this story touched your heart, help us spread its message by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. Remember, every small act of kindness creates ripples we might never see, just like Dex's father knew all along. Until our next story, keep choosing kindness, even when it costs you something, because you never know who might be watching, waiting to change your life forever. See you in the next one.